I'd been looking at William Blake's poetry for quite a few years, and my previous piece drew on William Blake quite a lot. And I was looking through the big, last, very, very dense poem that he wrote called Jerusalem, Emanation of the Giant Albion. And he talks quite a lot, 4 or 5 times he mentions this idea, which was a really important idea for him, of the 27 heavens. And the 27 heavens for him, in his own kind of mythology, were layers of obscurity that the individual had to penetrate to see the great vision of eternity. And it occurred to me then that thinking about the EUYO with its 27 nations represented in the makeup of the orchestra, that immediately the 27 links up in the Blake and with the youth orchestra. So that was a very happy coincidence.
We're playing a piece by Richard Causton, and Richard's here at the minute working with us with his new piece 27 Heavens that was written, commissioned for the Cultural Olympics. It's a really interesting insight into the process of writing and performing a new piece. It's great to work with a living composer and to see what's going on in his head when he's writing these things.
He could imagine very clearly what he wanted the sound to be like in the piece. He knew exactly how he wanted it to sound, and he knew every instrument group very well, how he wanted it to sound and with the balance, and he could change immediately when we didn't do what he wanted to do. So I thought this was really impressive how precise his imagination of the piece was in his head, and we could actually try better to put it into music.
To work on the Richard Causton piece for me is quite exciting, because in my first year at music college, my composition teacher recommended that I listen to a small CD of some of his smaller chamber works, and this is the first time that I've ever had a chance to hear any of his symphonic stuff. So that was quite exciting for me and very interesting to see his work in a different context.
It's much more interesting because I really work with amazing musicians, and I have the chance to work with composer who is composing this piece for a really interesting situation. And it's interesting because we here in the EUYO I've never done contemporary music, so we used to play Beethoven or Mozart or Brahms or Tchaikovsky, and suddenly comes something which is written now, to 2011-12.
When you're often playing pieces by the same composers, Mozart, Beethoven, Strauss, Mahler, that's really great, and they're all fabulous composers that I really enjoy playing, but I find it very refreshing to play a piece by a composer now, and especially with them there in the room giving you immediate feedback. That's really interesting to then kind of sort of get into their brain and see how the ideas are being formed. Yesterday in our rehearsal, Richard was just saying about how he came up with little motifs and how that developed. And it's really interesting to see that, because whereas you might play a Beethoven symphony, and that's very interesting, but you don't have the composer there necessarily telling you exactly how they came up with those ideas and exactly what it means. We can only sort of go on what we've heard before from other people, a sort of a second-hand experience, whereas this is really interesting because the composer is right there telling you what to do and why, and that's kind of brings the piece more to life in a way, I think.
It's a great privilege for us to have a piece written for us and to go through the workings right from the very beginning right until the end when we perform it.
I was born in the East End of London in Whitechapel, and I was living in Stratford when the Olympic bid came through, and now I'm still living on less than a mile away on the other side of the Olympic site in Leighton. So it feels like a very big thing that's happening locally, and you can hear the pile drivers, you can hear the safety announcements, you can see the hard hat workers going in to work every day. So it's not something that one can possibly ignore. It's not just something that you read about in the newspapers or see on the news. And moving from there to the kind of poetic side of things, it's very, very nice in an area which perhaps hasn't been as celebrated as it might have been in the past, to read in the pages of William Blake that he mentions Stratford, and he doesn't actually mention Leighton, but he mentions Bow and Poplar in this very, very exalted kind of ecstatic language, and I think there's something very, very exciting about that, and I'd like to see if I can reflect that in my music. The thing that struck me about the orchestra, listening to them in rehearsal, is how they make their instruments sing and how they create an incredible sense of melodic line that runs through what they do. And this sense of line is very, very important. It's very, very important in what I've written as well. And I wanted to really exploit that and write music in which they can allow their instruments to really sing through and create this great continuity and this great kind of melodic thread which runs through everything.
He's got a very clear image in his head about what he would like, and that's really useful for us to know that he really wants it in a specific way, and then it makes it very clear for us to be able to fulfill his ideas, and hopefully bring some of our ideas to the table as well.
In the beginning, my first experience with contemporary music was 2 years ago with some solo flute piece. And in the beginning it was quite hard to understand. But now I like it because it's new, it's something different. The expression mark is completely different of what was 200 or 300 years ago, and it's interesting. You find new things in music.
The Causton is possibly more technically difficult than some of the classical and romantic repertoire that we are required to play, but I'd also say that musically, that working on a project like this is actually incredibly challenging as well. We're coming to that completely afresh, with often, I'd say that most of the players have very little or no knowledge of Richard Causton's work. So it's kind of down to us to establish that musical language, and it's quite exciting for us actually to be part of, as the first people to play and establish that work. We're kind of forming the identity of the piece.
When we play a piece that has never been played before, you don't know what kind of sound you will have to make at the start, and you just start off, and after a few bars maybe you get a feeling what the music has to sound like, and you change it. And in this piece I think that it's kind of very classical, or I don't know, yeah, like a canon at the beginning, but with modern elements. And I like this, that to me it seems very transparent at the same time while it's modern music.
And the thing that struck me immediately from the word go is the incredible energy that they bring to their music making, as well as extraordinary technical skill. I mean, these are the cream of the young musicians in each country. I think competition is very, very fierce to get into this orchestra, and these people are drawn from all of these different countries. It's not just a national thing. It's a kind of, well, 27 nations. So the level of playing is very, very high, and the energy level and the positivity and the joy of music making is very, very evident as well, which is a really wonderful thing. It's very, very refreshing and very powerful, I think, to see in concert or even in rehearsal.
Technically it is very new and exciting. It's different. There's a lot of, for example, in the cello part there's divises right the way through the section, so everybody's got a solo line. So that sort of, it makes you really sort of feel like you're contributing on an individual level as well as a level in a section.
Normally for the flute, it's kind of, we're so used to play with a lot of vibrato, but in contemporary music you have to try to play without any vibrato, so the sound should be like this, like completely, how you say, not moving.
and there's some extended techniques involved in playing. For example, we have to play pizzicato, like a chitarra, which is something new to me, I've never done before, so that was quite interesting and fun to experiment with that.